Okay. So, when I was growing up, I'd go to school and people would ask me why questions, like, why do you wear a turban? They'd ask me, well, why have you got long hair? Why do you have a beard? And it was more a case of, why do you look different? I didn't really have a response for it. And if I did, the response, sort of, my only response was, well, this is my religion, it's my identity. And they'd come back with, well, you don't live in India, you live in England, so why don't you just fit in? And well, I didn't have a response for that. I'm born in England, why don't I just fit in? So when you're engaged in that sort of argument, where you've got to apply a certain kind of logic, which is kind of just answering a series of questions and arguing your point, well, any number of answers could be right and wrong, and you're never really going to exhaust the number of questions that someone's going to ask you. And then when I ceased to answer questions and I refused to answer questions, the response was, what are you scared of? Why don't you talk to us? So growing up with that constantly all the time was really, really difficult. So I'd go home and I'd ask my parents the same questions that I was being asked at school. So it was either kind of like, I'd get two responses. One was, why don't you already know the answer to the question? Or I'd get a very, very sort of straightforward answer, which would simply be, it's your identity, which didn't answer anything at all. So then I'd go to books, things like Man's books, where you'd get these question and answer sort of discussions going on. So they'd pose the same questions and give you an answer, and they just wouldn't provide a complete answer at all. You'd find arguments against everything. So when you've got that sort of setup, and you've got arguments for and against, and all you're doing is arguing for and against constantly, you kind of lose sight of what you're really doing. You don't really know why. So you lose faith. You lose complete faith in your religion. And I've struggled with that from childhood, and it's then in your workplace as well, because given that way of discussing religion, ethnicity, or any other sort of category of race or anything is just so ubiquitous, it's everywhere, that's how everybody's minds think, you can't escape it. So if you can't engage it, you feel like you're not there. So you're constantly anxious that you don't really exist. And it doesn't go away. So the question that I asked was, well, where do we go for these answers? Where do we go to respond to all of these questions? You can't go to the internet because you get the same stuff. You can't go to books, you can't go to your parents, you definitely can't go to your granthi because they speak a completely different language. So where do you go? And if there is nowhere to go, how do we then move forward from this? Because it's very difficult to live in that state or in that sort of way where you don't really exist, you don't come to the fore, you don't, you're just wondering about like a ghost. The lecture was about how this way of talking about identity had arisen with the advent or the sort of the British Raj in India, and how it's coloured pretty much everything that's happened since, and how we've come to understand ourselves. And I kind of sort of that allowed me to place all of this within the context. There's a reason why we're at this point. So there must have been a point where perhaps we weren't confused about identity, that it was natural to us and that it wasn't questioned in this way. And I want to know if we can either get back to that or we can rediscover a way out of it. But my primary reason for asking this is that having discovered that, having been through it myself, having spoken to other Sikhs, and knowing that they're going through the same thing, more worryingly, my nephew's going through exactly the same thing at school right now. And having to live with an identity crisis or not knowing how to express and articulate your identity seems to be a generational thing that's just been passed on. We're a generation that are inheriting this problem, and it will be, we need to work out whether we can solve that for the next generation or the generation after. Surely it can't continue this way. part of what we've learned during the week has been that perhaps Kirtan and Gurbani offers us a way out. Not directly engaging, but offers a way to work out who we are, you know, our being as human beings, and perhaps that's the way poetry, music, perhaps that can combat the whole analytical, logical way of arguing.
Do you feel like you're beginning to feel some optimism about the conundrum that you've experienced?
Some optimism? I feel like there's a lot of work to do. I feel like perhaps that there's a long way to go to transform the entire Sangha or the entire Sikh community, but certainly on a personal level, I feel that there is a practice that I can bring into my own life, whether it's, you know, with Kirtan as music or poetry, and that I can perhaps begin to find a way to express myself other than in logical terms, and that's quite nice. And I think that's something I'd like to sort of start doing.
And since you brought up the issue of generations and the youth, I mean, do you think there's a way to encompass the younger generation? So your younger cousin that you were talking about, would it be possible to reach them with this in the framework of the dialogue that we've been happening, or do you find that it's been exclusive in some ways?
No, I think it's certainly. I think it is possible. I think there are certain experiences you can provide children. I mean, just having a few days of being immersed into Kirtan and live classical Kirtan, you know, that in itself has been, you know, a huge eye opener as to perhaps that's the thing that's been missing. So if we can simply incorporate that into our everyday lives, not as in a deliberate kind of, you know, in a deliberate painful way, but just make it an organic part of Sikh existence. And I'm sure lots of Sikh families have that. It just wasn't in mine, and I'm sure it isn't in many others. But to incorporate that organically just gives them perhaps an emotional memory or a deeper understanding of what it means to be Sikh.
What's your name? How old are you? Where are you from? What do you like to do?
My name is Manoher Singh. I'm from the UK, and I'm a biology teacher.